I'm Brian Van, SportbikeTracker.com, and today we're going to break down the driven captive wheel spacer install on our 2018 Kawasaki Ninja 400 project bike. Okay, what are these and what do you need them for? Well, here are the stock ones. You can see we've already done the install. These are all steel and they're actually kind of heavy. The driven captive wheel spacers are anodized aluminum, so they're a lot lighter. That's one thing, so you're gonna lose a little bit of weight. Really not the biggest motivation to do it. These slide in and out of the dust seals very easily. Okay, there are no lips or ridges to hold them in place. When you're doing maintenance or tire change, especially for racing or track days, if you're taking the wheels off the bike frequently, you already know. These are a giant pain in the ass because they fall out at the most inopportune time when you're trying to get that wheel lined up back in there and get that axle through. There goes your wheel spacer, okay? The captive spacers have a little lip on the inside that when it's on the other side of the dust seal, holds it in place and reduces the possibility of that happening, making wheel changes a lot easier. So that is really the main reason you would install these, is to facilitate faster and easier wheel changes. If you like what you see, you're interested, you want to see all the steps it takes to install these, watch the rest of the video. We'll show you each and every one. Okay, the first thing we have to do to install the driven captive wheel spacers on the rear of our Ninja 400 is to remove this cotter pin. We've already done this before. You're typically able to reuse this a number of times, okay? If you destroy it, don't worry. All you have to do is go to any hardware store. You'll be able to find a replacement for this, no problem. And while you're at it, probably not a bad idea to grab more than one. That way you have it in the toolbox in case you run into a situation where you need it down the road. Trying to work it nice and easy so that we don't have to replace it by pushing the legs back together. And then from here, I grab onto it and just work it out of there using just a pair of side cutters. You can kind of see how I'm doing that. Okay, things in perfect shape. We'll just reuse that, no problem. I've got a 24 mil socket, 17 millimeter wrench. I will not be using a torque wrench in this video. If you prefer to use a torque wrench, not a problem, just go ahead and Google the torque specs, okay? And use the torque wrench. I'm going to take off the axle nut. You see I've already got a driven axle block slider in the washer. We'll leave all that. Okay, now we need to pull the axle out, okay? Clearly you can see how high up the rear wheel is right now. There's things you can do. If you're on the ground with your stand, what I like to do is you'll sit in such a way that you're able to put a foot under here to help support it. You know, you could also grab like a scrap 2x4 or something, slide it under there. While it won't touch it, it'll be a lot closer, so when you pull the axle, you know, we're not falling multiple inches, okay? So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna grab the wheel up here towards the top and begin to pull the axle out while supporting the wheel. Sometimes you have to wiggle the wheel a little bit to get it to cooperate. Okay, now, while still holding the wheel, I wanna support that caliper and let the wheel drop, making sure you do not touch the wheel speed sensor. I'm gonna show you that real closely in a second. You don't want to damage that at all. If you damage that, it's not going to work correctly. If it doesn't work correctly, then you're going to lose the ABS. And the way this bike is set up too, it's also looking for that wheel speed sensor reading to work with the speedometer, so on and so forth. Okay, so it's important you keep that intact. Okay, now, roll the wheel right by the caliper like so. Already slid the chain off on the other side. Those are the chain adjusters. Those are wonderful, just like the R3. There you go. There's the wheel off the bike now. I don't know what it is, man, but with these lightweight bikes and these chain adjusters, okay, the way these things literally are just flopping around in there. We've got a video out for the R3 that's a race bike now that I made some modifications here, just using some safety wire and a drill bit, okay? And honestly, if this is a track bike, I would do the same exact thing to this to hold those in place in a manner, you know, that you're able to take off if necessary, because when those things fall out like that, it really does make changing the rear tire a pain in the ass. For a street rider, it's not a huge deal because you're not doing that all the time. If you're riding on the racetrack, you change tires more frequently, you remove the rear wheel or the front wheel more frequently, and dealing with that it's a real pain in the ass. Speed sensor, told you I was going to show you that a little closer. It's right here, okay, and that's just plastic. You want to make sure that you're not clipping that and marking that up or chipping it with the rear wheel, so be very cognizant of that when you're servicing anything back here to help and avoid damaging that at all. Okay, so always be aware of that. Now we come over to the wheel itself, and here is that spacer. The driven wheel, captive wheel spacer kit for this bike includes 4 spacers, 2 for the front and 2 for the rear. Got a little multi-purpose grease there. I'm going to go ahead and pull the first. You can see there is no ridge or anything, it just slides right out of there. This is a relatively new bike, so it's not really dirty at all, but still I like to take the opportunity anytime I can just to wipe it down a little bit. Before I install these, I always like to make sure that there's some lubrication on the lip of the seal. Just a tiny little film is all you need to do there. Okay, now let's take this OE spacer and compare it to the others that we have and find the one that's going to fit here. Wipe it off, and of course I'm going to save all this stuff. And clearly that is the right one. You see the main difference between these two is, number one, this is lightweight. Man, this is steel. It's a lot heavier. Okay, but that lip is going to push past this dust seal, and that's what's going to hold it in place so they don't fall off as easy. And this makes changing tires a lot easier down the road. Kind of work it in on an angle, and you'll feel it seat. I want you to look all the way around it to make sure that you don't have the lip of the seal folded over at all. Kind of give it a little tug. Everything looks good there. Now we can turn the wheel over and do the other side. Pull that out, and once again you can see that comes out super easy. And a lot of times when you're changing tires, these things will literally, not all your chain adjusters will be falling out, so you're pissed, and then you wing this and the chain adjuster's hanging in there, that falls on the ground, so it's just a disaster. So putting these captive spacers in, especially for a track rider, makes a huge difference. Okay, wipe that off a little bit. Let's go ahead and compare. Quite clearly this is the one. Get a little lubrication. Just a thin film. And we'll push it in just like we did on the other side. Really hear that pop in there and engage. Work around this, make sure that the lip is not folded over. Okay, and there it is. Okay, so we're about ready to start putting this back together. A little trick I want to show you before you put the axle in. This is a little Maxima MPPL WD-40, basically it's WD-40 but better. I like to wipe the axle down, just a thin coating on it, also cleans it off. That helps to ensure that the next time you're going to take the axle out, it's just going to slide right out. Good idea for both a street bike or a track bike, of course. Now we'll grab the wheel and begin to get this ready. Hopefully the chain adjusters treat us nicely. Make sure your caliper is properly in the hanger. Roll the wheel beyond the caliper. We need to get it in far enough so we can drop the chain over it, which I'm going to do right now. Got a pretty cool chain video coming up here for this bike. It's going to be pretty badass. We got a cool kit from Vortex. Pretty excited about it. I think y'all are going to dig that. Okay, now let's make sure that we have this rear caliper in its proper position. Okay, there's a groove that's in the caliper hanger, and then there is a big boss in the swing arm. You'll make sure that's engaged completely. Now you need to take the wheel and lift it, get it to clear that wheel speed sensor, get the rotor to go in between the brake pads. I'm pulling back now to make sure that the spacer is lined up with the hanger. Once you get it to a certain position, try and get the axle started to hold it like so. Okay, now we're able to move the caliper around a little bit. The chain adjuster, kind of see I'm supporting the bottom of the rotor with my hand. And we'll continue to slide that axle through. All lined up. There we go, hanger. Okay. Chain adjuster. All lined up so the axle's popping through there. Okay, that looks good. Tease it a little bit from the other side. Pop it through. Slide that driven axle block adjuster back in place. And just thread that on a little bit. Okay, now, before we go any farther, I want you to make sure that your axle block adjusters are lined up correctly with the cutouts in the swing arm. Okay, they need to be seated all the way. This is a new bike. The chain tension is still fine. You should double check it. If you have miles on your bike, now is a great time to check your chain tension and adjust as necessary. For our purpose, all we need to do now is tighten the rear axle. Before I do that, I like to put a wrench, a 10 mil wrench here. I'm just going to put it in between the teeth of the sprocket and the chain. I'll roll that back like so. What I want to do is I want to put pressure on the axle block adjusters and the chain adjusters to really pull them forward into the swing arm. So I'm going to roll that back, and then I like to kind of smack it a little bit. We'll then take the ratchet while I'm holding the tire to keep pressure on it. And the pressure alone is almost always enough to hold the axle without a backup wrench on there and allow you to get it torqued, if not all the way, close enough to where it will not move, allowing you to get your backup wrench on the other side of the axle for final torque. Okay, so once you've got it all torqued down, remember, we got to get our cotter pin through there. Hole's not quite lined up. Take a look at this and see what we need to do adjustment-wise to get it there. See, okay, that's pretty tight right there, so I'm going to need to back it off just a little bit. Got my backup wrench on there. And you want to get that lined up just right, like so. Okay, we'll go ahead and throw the cotter pin in now. Like so. Spread the legs around like it was previously. There you go. Okay, so just like the rear of the bike, when we put these captive wheel spacers in, we have to be able to lift the bike, support it, so we can pull the axle out of the front wheel. Before I do that, because I'm going to lift it using a fork bottom stand, I'm going to pull this cotter pin out. Once you lift the bike, if you're using one of those forklift stands, you're supporting it down here. It just makes access to that cotter pin kind of tight, you know, real difficult. So we're going to take this off before we lift the bike. You can typically reuse these. What you'll find with the thicker cotter pins, like the ones they use on the axles, is you're going to be able to do this a couple of times, and then it's going to be fatigued enough that you just won't be able to continue bending it back and forth. It's just eventually going to break. You can either replace this with some type of a safety pin, or go to the home improvement hardware store and just grab a handful so you have a few spares in your box. Okay, pull that out like so. Now we're ready to lift the bike. I'm going to use a forklift stand and lift it from the bottom of the fork tubes. You can also use a headlift stand that would support the bike from the bottom of the triple tree. Got a 24 mil and a 17 for this axle. I don't use a torque wrench in my videos. If you're not comfortable doing that, you're gonna wanna go ahead and get your torque wrench out, research the torque spikes so you have those handy. See, that factory bolt was actually pretty darn tight. This wheel has only one caliper in the front, so what I'm hoping is this is gonna be like our R3 where I don't have to pull the calipers off the bike, the caliper off the bike, and change the wheel in the front. So we'll see how that goes. This would be the first time I pull it off the 400, and it's the same deal. You can see that just literally drops right out of there, piece of cake. Okay, now you'll grab the front wheel spacer, and you see that just slides in and out of there really easily. When you're doing a lot of tire changes, like I said, they really just kind of fall right out. The two front spacers are the same. Okay, so clearly see that right there, height, width, ridges, all the same. What I like to do when I pull that out is I'm gonna take the opportunity just to clean this area a little bit. There is your wheel speed sensor ring. Tiniest little bit of lubrication here, just enough to make sure the lip of the seal isn't dry. That's just all-purpose grease. You'll take the small lip and push that in. It's going to dip in behind the seal, kind of push it in on an angle, put a little pressure and kind of turn. And then you need to go around it and make sure that you don't have any of the seal lip folded under, like we do right there. Sometimes you have to just come at it again. Kind of lift up and push it back down. That usually helps to tease that seal back up. There we go. Okay, really important to take a second, just kind of inspect all the way around the lip. Make sure it's good. If you have any excess grease, you can wipe that off now. And you can see clearly how that's really captured in there. That's going to stay and make the wheel changes easier. Roll it over, just a mirror image here on the other side now. If your wheels are dirty, this is a great opportunity to just clean them up while you've got them off the bike. You can see that lip definitely wanted to kind of hang down there, so just taking my time, even with Steve's giant shadow, I can't see anything, to run around it and make sure that I have that all as it should be. You cannot leave that lip folded under. You leave that lip folded under and you're going to have a bearing failure down the road. Wipe up the excess, double check everything, then we're ready to reinstall the wheel on the motorcycle. Okay, before we put the wheel back on the bike, I'm going to clean and lubricate that axle bolt. That's just a little Maxima MPPL. Light film of that really goes a long way towards preventing seizure inside the wheel if it's in there for a long period of time. It just makes the job easier too. Now we're going to grab the wheel, make sure the rotor is on the caliper side, of course. Double check everything, make sure we're good, and be real cognizant too, the wheel speed sensor is right here. Okay, and the end of that is plastic, and what I don't want to see you do is ding that with the rotor. If you damage it, it won't read correctly. You're going to have issues with the ABS system, which of course you do not want. Kind of roll the wheel in place. You need to get the lip of the rim and the tire by that caliper. And then we'll lift it up. Get the rotor to slide in between the brake pads, like so. And you can already see the benefit of these captive spacers. Actually, no, you can't because it's not going great. Okay, now we're ready to reinstall the wheel. Once again, be cognizant of that wheel speed sensor. Want to roll the rim beyond the caliper, so the caliper is now between the wheel and the rotor. Lift up, get the rotor to slide in between the two brake pads, and continue to lift the rim. And slide it back like so, support it, grab your axle, push through. Something I like to do too is with the washer that goes between the nut. The fork, I just like to put just a thin coating on that. Once again, not going to use a torque wrench. If you prefer to use one, go ahead and look the spec up and grab that. Find a lot of times that you don't even have to use a backup wrench. Every bike's a little bit different. You usually get it to snug up without one. This one's spinning a little bit, so what we're going to do is we're going to rotate it now. I want to find the holes that are in it. So they're pretty much straight up and down, so when you put the cotter pin in again, right, looks like you knew what you were doing. Get your backup wrench in place to hold the axle bolt where it's at, and go ahead and torque. Okay, it's also important to note that when you're done, okay, we're gonna put the cotter pin in here in a second. We've got that all lined up. Castle nut is lined up with a hole in the axle bolt. When you slide the wheel out and you slide the rotor out from the caliper, it's always possible that you're going to depress the caliper piston a little bit. Best practice is just pump it up, make sure you have good brake pressure before you go ride it. Double check all your work. Lower the bike down. Okay, now we'll take the cotter pin and reinstall it if you're able to do so. If not, install the new one that you purchased. It's important that hole's lined up really well. If it's not, it's such a thick cotter pin, it's just not going to go through, okay? So you need to make sure the hole on the castle nut is lined up real good with the through hole in the axle bolt. And just kind of wrap the legs of this cotter pin around your axle nut, like so. There you have it. There is our driven captive wheel spacer install on our 2018 Ninja 400. Why do we put these on? We put these on, well, they look great. The red looks great, you gotta admit that, but really we put them on because they stay put in the wheel. If you're doing track days or racing the bike or for general maintenance, just makes wheel and tire changes a whole lot easier.